Wake TF up. Welcome to the Sovereign Signal, the channel of sovereign fire. Section 11. The Global Web Worldwide Capture Script 1 Funding, Governance, and the Machinery of Capture Foundations and Design of the Global Web Globalization wasn't a wave. It was an architecture. Three anchors sit at its core: the International Monetary Fund, IMF, the World Bank Group, and the World Trade Organization, WTO. They emerged to manage currencies, finance reconstruction, and referee trade, but their methods produced a repeatable pattern: indebted nations forced into austerity and privatization. Trade opened on terms that favor transnational corporations. Domestic policy constrained by supranational rules and tribunals. The effect is consistent. National sovereignty narrowed. Decisions pushed upward and outward. Living men, women, and children reduced to compliant participants within systems they did not design. IMF origin. Created at Bretton Woods, 1944, to stabilize exchange rates and provide short-term balance of payment support. World Bank origin. Also Bretton Woods. Initially the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, IBRD. Later expanded with IDA and IFC to finance development and private investment. WTO origin. Established in 1995 to enforce a comprehensive trade rulebook covering goods, services, and intellectual property. TRIPS, replacing the narrower GATT. Who funds and who decides. Voting weight and control funding flows matter because they translate into votes and agenda-setting power. These institutions are member-run, but voting power is weighted by financial subscription, not by population or need. IMF quotas and votes. Lead-in. Larger economies hold more votes. Mechanics. Quota shares determine voting power. Major changes require supermajorities that leading economies can block. Implication. Countries most subject to conditionality often have the least influence over the conditions imposed. World Bank capital and board dynamics. Lead-in. The IBRD's capital base and IDA contributions are dominated by wealthy members. Mechanics. Executive directors representing donor blocs steer lending priorities and safeguard bankability, repayment likelihood. Implication. Project selection often prioritizes returns and risk management over local resilience and autonomy. WTO rulemaking and enforcement. Lead-in. 1. Country, 1 vote nominally. But agenda control comes from who drafts text and who threatens retaliation. Mechanics. Complex negotiations, Doha, etc. Green room processes and technical committees favor resource-rich delegations and corporate advisory pipelines. Implication. The most organized blocs and corporate-aligned actors shape rules on tariffs, services, and IP. Behind the scenes. Lead-in. Think tanks, consulting firms, and policy schools translate donor preferences into best practice. Mechanics, research, rankings, and conditionality frameworks become the language civil services must use to qualify for funds. Implication. Funding buys vocabulary, and vocabulary becomes policy. Instruments of control, conditionality, liberalization, and tribunals. Control isn't declared. It's embedded in conditions, timelines, and enforcement mechanisms. IMF conditionality, standby arrangements, extended fund facilities. Lead-in. Balance of payments loans require policy changes. Core conditions. Fiscal austerity, cutting public spending, currency devaluation, removal of subsidies, tax reforms, and rapid liberalization. Result. Immediate contraction in public services. Wage and price shocks. Weakened bargaining power for labor. World Bank lending, IBRD IDA, and IFC involvement. Lead-in. Project finance shape sectors. Patterns. Large-scale infrastructure favoring export corridors, extractive industries, and cost recovery utilities. PPPs that prioritize investor protections. Result: assets shift to private hands. Fees and tariffs rise to satisfy investor models. Local control diminishes. WTO Rulebook. TRIPS, GATS, TBT, SPS. Lead-in. Trade law reaches inside national regulation. Mechanics. TRIPS locks down patents, medicines, seeds, software. GATS opens services, finance, education, health to foreign providers under non-discrimination. TBT SPS can challenge local standards as barriers. Result: domestic policy autonomy shrinks. Corporate IP and market access gain legal force. Investor-state dispute settlement, ISDS, through treaties. Lead-in. Private tribunals can penalize governments for regulation. Mechanics. BITs and investment chapters in trade deals allow investors to sue states for expropriation or unfair treatment. Result: regulatory chill. Governments hesitate to pass laws that could trigger billion-dollar claims. How control spreads. Policy transmission belts. Control spreads through technical assistance, crisis leverage, and the Washington Consensus template fiscal discipline, privatization, deregulation, and trade liberalization. Crises accelerate compliance. Crisis leverage. Lead-in. When reserves fall or currencies wobble, speed matters. Mechanics. Emergency facilities require rapid reforms. Dissenting ministries are sidelined. Time-bound actions force legislation. Result: policy passes under duress, with limited debate and lasting consequences. Technical assistance and benchmarks. Lead. Consultants and missions design credible reforms. Mechanics. Benchmark indicators condition disbursements. Civil servants must hit targets to unlock tranches. Result: domestic agendas get recoded into donor metrics. Local priorities become secondary. Ranking and reputational pressure. Lead-in. Ease of doing business, credit ratings, and governance indices. Mechanics. Countries chase better scores to attract capital. Reforms align with private investor expectations. Result: competition for capital hardens the same template everywhere. Corporate infiltration. From lobbying to law, trade, and finance rules don't write themselves. Corporations embed through revolving doors, advisory councils, and industry coalitions. Revolving doors. Lead-in. Movement between ministries, banks, and corporate boards. Mechanics. Expertise justifies hiring. Contacts translate into influence. Result: regulatory priorities mirror corporate strategies. Sector coalitions. Lead-in. Pharma, agribusiness, energy, tech-shaped chapters, and annexes. Mechanics. Draft texts arrive pre-negotiated. Stakeholder consultations privilege well-funded actors. Result: rules tilt toward IP enforcement, investor protections, and market access. Procurement and PPP models. Lead-in. Standard contracts built by global firms. Mechanics. Risk allocation and arbitration clauses define future disputes. Result: long-term obligations anchor public budgets to private returns. Concrete patterns and examples. Crises and consequences. Abstractions don't cut it. The web's fingerprints show up in repeated crisis arcs and sector outcomes. Latin America debt crisis, 1980s-1990s. Lead-in. External debts ballooned after interest rate shocks. Mechanics. IMF-led restructurings demanded austerity and privatization. State assets sold. Public employment cut. Consequences: poverty spikes, deindustrialization, rising inequality. Political volatility, all under the banner of stabilization. Asian financial crisis, 1997-1998. Lead-in. Capital flight cascaded after currency pegs broke. Mechanics. Bailouts tied to rapid liberalization and bank restructurings. Social costs borne domestically. Consequences: sharp recessions, local firms displaced. Foreign ownership surged in strategic sectors. Argentina 2001-2002. Lead-in: currency board collapse and default. Mechanics: IMF programs debated and withdrawn. Eventual policy rupture with capital controls and devaluation. Consequences: years of instability. Lesson in how templates can fail, but still impose deep scars. Greece and Eurozone, 2010s. Lead-in: sovereign debt under a shared currency with limited monetary tools. Mechanics: Troika, conditionality fiscal cuts, privatizations, labor deregulation traded for bailouts. Consequences: long depression, assets sold, regulatory capacity constrained. Trade and IP impacts: TRIPS on medicines. Agriculture. Lead-in: strong patents increase prices and limit generic competition. Mechanics: compliance enforced through WTO dispute settlement. Exceptions exist but are politically costly. Consequences: access barriers for essential medicines. Seed licensing models reshape farming. Dependency deepens. ISDS chill: energy, environment, public health. Lead: governments face claims for shifting tariffs, banning toxins, or changing tax rules. Mechanics: arbitration panels decide. Appeals are limited. Awards can be massive. Consequences: policy caution. Settlements drain budgets. Reforms diluted to avoid litigation. What they control in practice: budgets, borders, and blueprints. Control shows up wherever money moves, goods cross, and policies encode private rights. Budgets lead-in: austerity and cost recovery reshape public priorities. Mechanics: health, education, and care get cut or fee-based. Utilities price for investor returns. Result: living standards decline. Households absorb costs once socialist. Borders. Lead-in: tariff bindings and quotas set externally. Mechanics: local industries compete against subsidized multinationals. Defensive policies risk retaliation. Result: import dependence. Value chains controlled from abroad. Blueprints. Lead-in: regulatory models imported wholesale. Mechanics: financial liberalization. Independent central banks with narrow mandates. Competition laws that ignore community resilience. Result: a single global template replaces local problem solving. Generational tightening. How the web grips families over time. Control isn't a one-off. It's cumulative. Families experience it as a series of narrowing choices. Parents. Lead-in: stable work erodes, local firms close. Public services thin. Mechanics: wages lag inflation. Fees rise for schools, transport, health. Mortgages and consumer credit fill the gap. Impact: more hours, less security. Savings drained by crisis and utility hikes. Children. Lead-in: debt-funded education. Precarious jobs. Algorithmic gatekeeping. Mechanics: credentials inflate, entry wages stagnate. Surveillance expands through platforms and IDs. Impact: dependency on digital landlords. Fewer paths to asset ownership. Elders. Lead-in: pensions squeezed. Care systems commercialized. Mechanics: means testing and private insurance replace universal provision. Costs shift to families. Impact: dignity conditioned on market performance, not social duty. The lie and the ledger. Progress versus sovereignty. Progress was sold as integration, mobility, and efficiency. The ledger reads differently. Concentrated decision-making, privatized essentials, patent-locked knowledge, tribunal-guarded investment, and crisis-leveraged reforms that endure long after emergencies fade. Sovereign living men, women, and children were turned into compliant users of systems designed elsewhere. Lead-in: if you can't set the rules, you don't hold sovereignty. Mechanics. Rules sit in treaties, loan conditions, procurement contracts, and IP regimes, not in community assemblies or local councils. Result: everyday life becomes a subscription to utilities, to platforms, to debt. The web bills you for existing. Counter-reading the web, where capture is vulnerable. Even within this architecture, there are seams places where capture can be named and refused. Transparency over conditionality. Lead in. Publish loan terms and benchmarks. Mechanics. Force public debate before commitments. Audit social impacts, not just fiscal targets. Result: reduce crisis leverage. Reclaim pace and scope of reform. Domestic floors for essentials. Lead in. Carve-outs for health, water, energy. Mechanics. Statutory minimums shield budgets from conditional cuts. Result: austerity cannot zero out the basics. Treaty review and ISDS rollback. Lead in. Sunset clauses, renegotiations, exclusions for public interest. Mechanics. Remove ISDS. Keep disputes in public courts. Embed precautionary principles. Result: restore regulatory courage. Local procurement and open standards. Lead. Prioritize domestic capacity and interoperable tech. Mechanics. Reduce vendor lock-in. Build commons infrastructure. Result: shift spending from rents to resilience. These are mechanics, not slogans. The web was built with rules. Rules can be contested with precision. Warning shot: globalization, as managed by the IMF, World Bank, and WTO, is a web of conditions, contracts, and courts that narrows sovereignty and expands dependency. Funding weights votes. Conditionality trades crisis relief for permanent policy change. Trade rules elevate patents and investor rights above local needs. Tribunals punish governments for regulating. Corporate pipelines draft the text. The result is generational tightening. Costs up, choices down, time consumed by surviving systems designed elsewhere. This isn't abstract. It is the everyday extraction, concealed as policy sophistication. Wake TF up. Section 11. The Global Web Worldwide Capture Script 2. Control. Generational tightening. And everyday impact on what they control, the reach of the web, the IMF, World Bank, and WTO do not simply advise. They dictate. Their reach extends into every sector of life, every necessity, every decision. Sovereign living men, women, and children are told these are technical matters. In truth, they are chains. Finance. IMF austerity programs dictate national budgets. Currency devaluations strip savings. Central banks are forced into independence, meaning obedience to global markets, not to the people. Trade. WTO rules dismantle tariffs, quotas, and protections. Local industries collapse. Farmers are forced to compete against subsidized imports. Sovereignty traded for market access. Law. Investor-state tribunals, ISDS, allow corporations to sue governments for regulating. Nations are penalized for protecting health, environment, or workers. Law weaponized against sovereignty. Medicine. Pharma monopolies enforce patents through WTO's TRIPS agreement. Essential medicines priced beyond reach. Nations forced to comply or face sanctions. Bodies commodified. Food. Seed patents enforced globally. Farmers criminalized for saving seeds. Logistics monopolies dictate distribution. Families fed by corporations, not communities. Survival controlled. Energy. Utilities privatized. Water, electricity, telecoms sold to investors. Nations told competition lowers prices. In truth, bills soar, sovereignty shrinks. Education. Universities turned into debt factories. Global rankings dictate policy. Parents told education is freedom. In truth, it is financial slavery. Media. Narratives scripted worldwide. Consolidation of voices into corporate monopolies. Algorithms dictate perception. Truth inverted into spectacle. Digital. Platforms colonize globally. Surveillance embedded. Algorithms enforce obedience. Technology sold as liberation, delivered as chains. The web is total. Sovereignty is stolen. Generations are chained. 2. Corporate infiltration. Governments hollowed out corporations, infiltrated governments, writing laws, shaping treaties, dictating policy. Lobbyists became lawmakers. CEOs became ministers. Sovereignty hollowed out, replaced by corporate obedience. Food monopolies dictated agricultural policy. Pharma monopolies dictated health policy. Energy monopolies dictated climate policy. Tech monopolies dictated digital policy. Governments became subsidiaries. Nations became franchises. Sovereignty became branding. 3. Treaty chains. Contracts of capture treaties were sold as cooperation, but they were cages. NAFTA hollowed industries in North America. Jobs outsourced, communities collapsed. EU treaties bound nations into supranational obedience. Sovereignty traded for integration. WTO agreements stripped sovereignty from parliaments. Trade rules enforced by tribunals. Bilateral treaties locked nations into debt and dependency. Treaties were not progress. They were contracts of capture. 4. Generational tightening. Lies across time. Generations were conditioned into obedience. Parents were told, globalization means opportunity. They watched industries collapse, jobs outsourced, communities hollowed. Children were told, the world is open. They inherited debt, precarious work, surveillance, digital colonization. Elders were told, integration means peace. They defended treaties as progress, even as sovereignty was stolen. Generations were told globalization was inevitable, unstoppable, natural. In truth, it was engineered, scripted, imposed. V. Everyday impact. The cost of betrayal. The web is not abstract. It is lived every day. Wages versus inflation. Families work harder, earn less. One income no longer sustains a household. Cost of living. Bills soar. Utilities privatized. Food monopolized. Medicine priced beyond reach. Debt. Mortgages, student loans, consumer credit. Families chained to banks. Broken communities. Local shops closed. Churches hollowed. Communities dismantled. Surveillance. Digital platforms monitor every move. Algorithms dictate perception. Sovereignty replaced by obedience. The betrayal is measured in bills, debts, broken homes, hollowed communities. Venom. Naming the web. The venom of truth is this. IMF loans are not aid. They are chains. TOE rules are not cooperation. They are cages. World Bank projects are not development. They are extraction. Corporations infiltrated governments. Treaties bound nations into obedience. Generations were lied to. Sovereignty was stolen. 7. Awakening against the web. Awakening means refusing the web. Refusing IMF debt. Refusing WTO rules. Refusing World Bank projects. Refusing corporate infiltration. Refusing treaty chains. Awakening means naming the web, exposing the machinery, refusing the contracts. Awakening means building parallel capacity, sovereign finance, sovereign food, sovereign medicine, sovereign media, sovereign energy, sovereign community, sovereign digital. Awakening is rupture. Awakening is venom. Awakening is sovereignty restored. 8. The warning shot. This is the warning shot. Globalization is not progress. It is capture. IMF, WTO, World Bank, treaties, corporations, all instruments of planetary colonization. Generations were lied to. Sovereignty was stolen. The web tightens. Awakening means rupture. Awakening means refusal. Awakening means sovereignty restored. Wake TF up. This is the Sovereign Signal. Support the mission. Like, share, subscribe. Wake TF up.